Hi friend, great to see you today. Today we're going to work on hips. It's going to be fast, it's going to be effective, and hopefully you'll hop off your mat just being a little more connected, a little bit more mobilized, and just a little happier in your hip joints in general. So we're going to need two things today. So some kind of pinky or tennis ball, just one will do you just fine. If you have two, go ahead and grab two, but one is totally great. And then some kind of resistance band. You could, if you have one of those sort of like fabric booty bands, that'll work. I just have a TheraBand today, so I'll show you how to tie it, but if you have a loop, that'll work just as well. Okay. So we're going to take the band off to the side. What we're going to do first, we're going to kind of open up through the back of the hip. So even though this is a very short series today, what we're working with is the idea that we're going to do a little bit of release, a little bit of mobilization, and then add some load onto the hip joints so they kind of know where they are in space and they can be really well supported by the musculature that surrounds them. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your ball and you're going to kind of put it right into the middle of your tush cheek, sort of the squishy part. I'm going to make a fist with my opposite hand and sneak it on the opposite side of my pelvis so my hips are level. Okay, now you don't want the ball too high, too low. You don't want it hitting any bone. Just kind of right in the squishy part, a little bit higher than maybe the center of your glute. Oof, and then we're going to draw that knee up. Try to avoid pulling the knee into the chest. Just have the knee facing straight up to the ceiling. Take your hand to the top of your knee if you can, and just start to draw some small circles. Okay, now that feels a little intense. I kind of feel like a little zing. So that means that I could potentially be on a bit of a nerve. So I'm going to move the ball just a little bit. That feels better. Kind of feels like I'm more in some muscle there. And we don't need these to be really big circles. We're going to take about 10 in each direction. Small is fine. You're putting a little downward pressure on your knee so the femur bone kind of goes back into the socket. That's the idea at least. I'm in the reverse direction. And the idea here is that we're noticing if the whole torso and pelvis wants to move, or can we kind of start to disassociate that femur bone from the movement of the pelvis. So we're really starting to cue into what it is to have the hip joint move and not a lot of other stuff follow. Okay, great. Let's switch over to the other side. Oh, that side feels lovely. I'm going to take the ball, I'm going to put it in the upper center tush cheek on the other side. I'm going to take a fist with my opposite hand and just rest it so my hips are more or less even, pelvis is more or less even. Push down on the knee, not quite in the right place. So, you know, the more you do this kind of stuff, the more you can more quickly make assessments about whether those props are in the right place. So if you're kind of new to this sort of work, give yourself a moment, settle, just be like, would it feel better if the ball was 2 inches this way, 1 inch that way, centimeter up, down? Your body will tell you, and so like any new skill or new experience, it just takes practice. All right. Small circles, little downward pressure. They do not have to be big to be effective. Putting a little pressure, a little hopefully muscular something on the back of that hip. Good. And then come on down. I'm going to take my ball out to the side. I'm just going to rest it. Hopefully it won't kind of roll back and hit me in the face. I'm going to take my hands onto my hip points, so kind of the top of my pelvis. I'm just going to ask that to stay pretty still. I'm not really going to be too concerned with my abs or ribs or anything today, just sort of feeling comfortable. And then I'm going to start a simple leg slide on one leg, out, and then pulling back in. Okay, let's do about 5 on each side. So what we're looking for here is when the leg moves out, does a whole bunch of other stuff want to happen? Or can we think about keeping everything pretty still so that we get that movement right at the hip joint? So there's a little bit of core work that needs to be done here to kind of hold the torso stable, but not a ton. Let's do one more. And back in, let's do the other side. So the purpose of doing this is to give a little length to the front of the hip. This is a short series. We're not going to spend a ton of time really stretching the hip flexors, releasing them out, whatever that means. But we're just saying, hey, okay, what can I do to unravel the front of the hip a little bit? Because we did a little bit of pressure and work on the back of the hip. So we're just going to see if we can kind of start to tease out or tease away some of the tension that might be living in the front of the hip. Okay, now we're going to take this into a little sliding knee-hip circle. So I'm going to let one knee open out to the side of the room. I'm going to slide it long. I'm going to turn the leg back into parallel and pull it in. Now let's do 3 in each direction. There might be a little bit of movement in the pelvis. We are a connected being, but you just want to notice if the whole thing flops. Okay, so we're just seeing if we can move from this joint where the thigh bone meets the pelvis. I'm going to do one more. That was 4. Oh well, you get a bonus. Yay. Now we're going to reverse that direction. So I'm going to slide the leg out in parallel, turn the leg out and pull it back in. Oh, that's a little more interesting. So you might not feel huge stretching action here, but there's a lot of structures that are expanding, contracting, mobilizing. And let's do one more just to even it out. And back in. Okay, second side. So I'm going to start by opening my knee out to the side of the room. I'm going to see if I can keep my pelvis pretty still. I'm going to slide the leg forward, turn it in, and pull it back in. And open. So one of the reasons we're doing, or I'm choosing to do this today, is that it's very unloaded. So sometimes when the hips are just so cranky, if we go to do a bunch of really intense stretching or like really big end range mobility work, they will just say, no, I'm just going to feel worse. Okay, so we're starting kind of slow, sort of in that somatic place. Let's reverse direction, taking the leg long. Open the knees to the side of the room. You can imagine someone pulling it a little bit and then fold it back in. So we're allowing gravity to be our friend here, finding not so much momentum, but just the feeling of glide and slide through the joints, and the floor is really supporting the rest of our torso here. Good. And one more. Okay, heel toe your feet really wide, almost to the edges of your mat, maybe even off. And then the first round of this, we're going to keep the pelvis pretty still and just see how much you can move your femur bones, knocking them from right to left. Okay, so again, there will be a little bit of movement, but it's different. We're going to go here in a minute. Seeing if you can keep those hip points fairly up towards the ceiling. So we're really moving the femur bones inside of the hip joint. And the reason we're making that choice is we're just kind of seeing where they stop. Maybe where there's a tug on the knee, maybe where it doesn't feel so good in your back anymore. Okay, and now let's just go for it. So you're going to reach the knee that's going into the midline forward. You can get that beautiful, lovely lengthening through the front of the hip there, and then over to the other side and reach. It's a little more stretchy feeling here, and reach. I don't know, I call these windshield wipers. You know, you can make up a fun name for them if you want. And reach. And reach. And let's do one more each side. And reach. And reach. Okay, let's grab the band. All right, now I'm going to come up to sit just so I can do this a little bit more effectively and also talk you through it. So again, if you have one of those like booty bands or fabric loops or TheraBand loops, just go ahead and slide it up around your knees. I have this longish TheraBand. So I'm going to lay it across the top of my thighs, and then I'm going to pull it, not asphyxiatingly tight, but you know, with a little bit of tension. Wrap it around the backs of my thighs again, take it around the top of my legs again, oh my gosh, origami, then I'm going to crisscross it so I can hold on to it. I'm not going to knot it, there's no need. If you would like to, go for it, but I'm not going to because we're going to unknot it in just a second. And then I'm going to hold on to the edges of the band with my hands, and right away I'm going to heel toe my feet apart, a little wider than hip distance apart, okay? I'm going to drop my tailbone, I'm going to drop my pubic bone so my pelvis is pretty flat up to the ceiling. I'm just simply going to push my knees apart, knock them back together. Okay, so it's like doing like a supine or laying down clam action, or like a fire hydrant deal. So I'm just getting a little bit of hello. So if I want more, I can just pull it a little tighter. A little arm love in there too. Let's go for 5. Good. working not only those deep external rotators of the hips, but a little bit of, you know, the bigger glute muscles, just kind of the side and the back of the pelvis, those muscles that reside there. Good. Okay, now you're going to find a place that feels like you can maintain. We're going to bridge the pelvis up and down. We'll do 10 of these, keeping that push of the band apart. Now I am choosing purposely to not articulate my spine today because I really want to go for that hip hinging action. Okay, so I'm thinking about pushing my sacrum through my hip joints, and then I'm thinking about dropping my tailbone so it touches the floor first. Okay, let's go for 5 and 4. Starting to add that little bit of load. 3, a little bit of resistance. 2, and I'm going to stay up at the top and hold, and I'm going to do little butterfly pulses. 10, 9, 8, 7, keeping the hips nice and level. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and lower down. I'm going to undo the band, and then I'm going to go ahead and take one ball of the foot into the band and stretch it up towards the ceiling. Okay, so I'm going to encourage you, even though it's like so tempting to be like, oh yeah, I get to stretch my hamstrings, to think about the leg that's on the floor. Okay, so it could be a little bit of a humble moment. So keep the leg that's on the floor really flat on the floor. We're trying to avoid that little light that you can see on my leg now. Really flatten it out. It's going to make your pelvis tip a little bit. And then pull the opposite leg only as far up as that leg that's on the floor stays flat. So you can see mine is not, if I go more, then I get a little pop. Okay, and then we're going to do some smallish leg circles from here. So again, I'm really paying attention, focusing my mind, my concentration, my energy on the leg that's on the floor. This one that's dancing around up here is just having its own little party. The one that's on the floor is really doing the work. And 2, and 1, and let's switch to the other side. So part of the reason for that is to get a more honest hamstring stretch, and also to keep the pelvis in, you know, whatever we believe to be a more neutral position, so that we're not kind of flexing the back and stretching out the back, which is a decision. It's not a bad thing to do. It's just what we're after here is to get really clear movement through the hip joint. So we can see that on this side for me, my left leg is quite flexible in the back, so the circle is going to be a little lower, but I'm really focusing on that right leg, staying down, staying lengthened, attempting to get my right hamstring on the floor. Ooh, is it possible? I don't know. I better practice. Reversing direction, anywhere from like 4 to 6 circles, keeping the hips pretty still. Good. Relax. Okay, we're going to come to stand. Woohoo, standing, yay. 2 more things to do here. So we're going to take some strapped or some resistance deadlifts, which I love for hip stuff, okay? So if you have weights and you prefer weights, you could totally do weights. There's something nice about having the resistance band, and I will tell you why. So I'm going to step into the resistance band, and then I'm going to use the pressure outward on my feet as a way to kind of plug into my hips. So I'm going to go side view. So I'm pushing the outer edges of my feet into the band, and then I'm going to bend over from my hip joints and choke down quite low on the strap, okay? You can see my hands are just sort of dangling right underneath my shoulders. They're not pulling back, okay? They're just heavy there. I'm going to shift my weight a little bit forward so I'm not hanging out back here. I'm really trying to get my knees right over my ankles. There's a little bend in the knees, okay, just so I feel nice and secure. And I'm going to keep my back straight, and I'm going to pull up from my hips, from my glutes, and then slowly lower back down. And coming up. And down. I'm going to try about 8 more, maybe give myself a little bit more resistance. So the resistance is coming from pulling the band up, and the structure, or the primary structure that I'm thinking about loading here, is the back of my hip, is my glutes, okay? There's a ton of other things working, but we kind of want to avoid a little of that wave-like action through the spine. Otherwise, this to me feels like it's very dry. It's very boring, not boring. It's a lovely exercise, but very simple, very clear. Hinging from the hip joint. Let's do 3. Whew. Hello, tush. And 2. And 1. Okay, now I'll just say a little bit about form because this is one that I really feel like all of us should be practicing all the time, either with the weights. If you start to go down enough where you feel your back rounding, that's where you want to stop. So you really want to listen to this part of your spine. When it starts to curl or like noticeably curl, that's where you kind of want to pause the movement and you want to keep it right hinging from your hips up and down. Okay, so my little tip to you. All right, last thing, here we go. So again, if you were using that fabric booty band or TheraLoop or whatever, you can just wrap it around your thighs. For me, I'm gonna go ahead and this time I am gonna tie my TheraBand. So I'm gonna do a double wrap around my legs. Okay, prof origami. Then I'm gonna make a little knot in the front. You know, so the more you do this, the more you'll kind of know how much tension is appropriate for your body. And we're going to take some lateral walks here. So I'm going to find a slight squat position, a little hip hinge. So I'll show side view, nice and straight in my back. Okay, my hips are slightly behind my heels. It's just to load up the glutes a little bit more. All right, nothing bad's going to happen to your knees if they go forward. It's just going to be more quad, less glute. Okay, I'm going to start at one end of the mat. Hands are either on the hips or in front of you. Face, heart, doing a dance, whatever, it doesn't really matter. You're just going to start to take some little crab walks side to side. Okay, now this is a very, it's a sneaky exercise. So, loading up the glutes, loading up the side hips. What often happens is we sneak out from the leg. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't really feel anything happening. So what you want to think about is this is very similar to your side lying work, kind of in the more classical Pilates repertoire. You know, when we do those clamshells or side leg lifts, fire hydrant action through the leg. We kind of want to avoid the place where this is happening. And the only reason for that is going to turn on different muscles. And so what we want to do is try to load up the lateral hip here. So I'll do a couple side view. So really trying to step out, okay, from the knee, keeping the knee and the foot fairly in their little parallel lines. Whew, okay, so you just do as many of these as you can tolerate. They're challenging. Notice if your pelvis is wanting to tuck under. Keep lengthening the tailbone out long. And then a few more. Okay, and then kind of end up somewhere towards the center of your mat where you feel like you have some space, and then just take a couple banded squats up and down. Okay. So happy hips are strong hips. Okay. If we spend all of our time, so you just keep squatting forever, up and down, banded squats, pushing those knees apart. If we spend all of our time stretching and releasing, we're not really giving structure, we're not giving support to the joint. Okay, so that resistance training, that strength training bit, really in any part of the body, but we're talking about hips today for hip health, is just paramountly important. So make sure if you're doing your release, you're also doing your mobilize. You're also doing your loading. After your loading, you can throw your TheraBand in a corner and you can say bad things to it, whatever you would like. Just stand for a second, kind of feel how possibly light, how connected your hip joints feel. Yay. Thank you so much for joining me. I will see you next time. Take good care. Bye.